My name is Maddie. This happened when I was 7 years old, and even now, more than 20 years later, it's the one memory from my childhood that I can replay almost perfectly. People always say your mind changes memories as you get older. Maybe that's true, but there are some nights that leave marks so deep, you don't remember them because you remember them because your brain refuses to let them go. My parents had separated only a few months earlier. My mom and I had moved into a small ground floor apartment in a quiet neighborhood that mostly housed young families and older couples. It wasn't a bad place to live, just old. Money was tight back then. My mom worked long hours, and when she got home, she was exhausted. Even so, she always tried to make the apartment feel like home. We'd eat dinner together, watch a little TV, and she'd tuck me into bed. Well, she'd try to. I almost never stayed there. Almost every night I'd wake up scared, grab my blanket, and quietly climb into my mom's bed. Eventually, she stopped carrying me back to my room. She'd just smile, lift the blanket, and let me crawl in beside her. Our apartment wasn't very big. A narrow hallway connected the living room to the bedrooms. My room was directly across from hers, so if you stood in one doorway, you could see straight into the other. Behind my mom's bed was a large window that looked out toward a grassy courtyard. One thing my mom always did before going to sleep was leave her bedroom door halfway open. For Oliver. Oliver was an orange tabby we'd rescued from a local shelter about a year earlier. He absolutely hated closed doors. The air felt unusually warm that night. I remember kicking my blanket off sometime after midnight because the room felt stuffy. Then, I woke up. Everything was quiet except for the fan humming across the room and the insects outside the window. I blinked a few times, still half asleep, trying to figure out why I'd suddenly woken up. Then I noticed something. Oliver wasn't on the bed anymore. That alone wasn't enough to scare me. Sometimes he jumped down to get a drink of water. But then I looked toward the bedroom door. He was sitting there, perfectly still. His body was centered in the doorway. His tail was wrapped tightly around his paws. His ears weren't laid back. They were pointed straight ahead. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking outside. He was staring across the hallway, into my bedroom. I remember thinking it was odd because if he'd wanted to leave, he would have already walked into the hallway. Instead, he looked almost frozen, like he was waiting. I whispered his name. Oliver? Nothing, not even a twitch. Then he slowly let out one long, low, uneasy meow. Almost like he was warning someone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I kept staring at him, expecting him to relax or come back to bed. Instead, he slowly stood. Every movement felt unusually careful. He walked into the hallway without making a sound, then disappeared into my bedroom. The apartment became completely silent. Even the insects outside seemed quieter. I waited. I expected Oliver to come walking back out. Instead, I heard the faintest sound. Not the floor. Something else. Like fabric brushing against a wall. My stomach tightened. I reached over and gently shook my mom's shoulder. "Mom?" She didn't respond. I shook her again, a little harder. "Mom?" She slowly opened one eye. "What is it?" I pointed toward the hallway without saying a word. Still half asleep, she looked toward the bedroom door. At that exact moment, something moved inside my bedroom. Not Oliver. Someone else. A dark shape shifted behind the doorway. For just a split second, it disappeared from view again. My mom's expression changed instantly. Every trace of sleep vanished from her face. Then, a slow footstep echoed from my bedroom. My mom barely breathed. I remember looking up at her. Instead, she slowly reached behind me and pulled me closer to her side. Her eyes never left the hallway. Neither did mine. My mom leaned forward just enough to peek around the bedroom doorway. The moonlight from the open window stretched across the hallway, creating long shadows on the floor. At first, I didn't see anyone. Then a figure slowly stepped into the light. It was standing just outside my bedroom. It wore a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled over his head. My entire body froze. Even at 7 years old. I knew something was terribly wrong. Without taking her eyes off him, my mom wrapped one arm around me. With the other, she reached behind the headboard and pushed the window open the rest of the way. The screen rattled. The sound echoed through the apartment. For the first time, the man moved. He took one slow step toward our bedroom. My mom whispered, Hold on. Before I understood what she meant, she shoved the screen outward. She lifted me with both arms. She pushing me through the open window. The drop wasn't far, just a few feet onto the grass below. I landed awkwardly, rolled once, and immediately looked back toward the apartment. My mom climbed out seconds later. Run! We sprinted across the grass as fast as we could. I looked over my shoulder only once. The bedroom window was still open. The curtain was moving in the breeze. For just a second, I thought I saw someone standing inside, watching us leave. Then the curtain drifted back into place. We reached the front of the other houses. My mom started screaming for help. Doors opened. People stepped outside asking what had happened. One neighbor hurried us inside while another called 911. A few minutes later, red and blue lights filled the parking lot. 2 police officers entered the apartment while another stayed outside with us. He asked my mom the same questions over and over. What did he look like? Did he say anything? Did you recognize him? She answered every question the same way. I couldn't see his face. No. I've never seen him before. The officers searched every room, every closet, every cabinet, even underneath the beds. Almost 20 minutes later, one of them came back outside. The apartment's clear. Those words should have made everyone feel better. They didn't, because whoever had been inside was gone. The officers checked window, found it open, so his guess was that the man has entered from my bedroom window. Police couldn't find anything but suggested that we stay away from the house for tonight. We drove to my grandmother's house later that morning. For the next week, we didn't go back to the apartment. My mom packed a small bag for both of us, and we stayed at my grandmother's house across town. During the day, everything almost felt normal. My grandmother did everything she could to distract me. We'd watch cartoons, bake cookies, or play in the backyard. But every night was different. I'd wake up from the nightmare. Eventually, life had to continue. My mom couldn't afford to keep missing work, so one afternoon she decided it was time to return to the apartment and start cleaning. She wanted things to feel normal again. I remember following her around while she vacuumed, dusted shelves, and opened the windows to let fresh air inside. She tried acting like everything was okay, but every few minutes I'd catch her staring toward the hallway, almost unconsciously. There was this strange heaviness, the kind of feeling you can't explain. The investigation slowly lost momentum. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, the case went cold. My mom refused to stay there. Within a month, my mom found a new job, and we moved to Grandma's house. Even after we moved, she developed habits that never went away. Every night she'd check the front door, then check it again, then pull on it one last time before going to bed. I never questioned it. Honestly, neither of us ever completely recovered. Years passed. I grew up, finished school, started working. Life slowly moved forward the way it always does. A few years ago, I finally asked my mom something I'd wondered about my entire life. What made you react so fast that night? She looked at me for a long moment before answering. She paused. I moved because he smiled. That answer sent a chill through me, because I had never seen his face. I asked her what she meant. She shook her head. I only saw it for a second, but he wasn't surprised we'd noticed him. He smiled, as if he'd been expecting us to wake up. She never talked about it again, and neither did I. Oliver lived for another 4 years. He was the gentlest cat I've ever known. He never acted strangely before that night, and never did afterward. Animals notice things people miss. Whatever the reason, I truly believe he gave us the only warning we were ever going to get. Without him, I don't know what would happen to me and Mother. Thank you, Oliver. My name is Ethan. This happened when I was in 7th grade, and for years afterward, I couldn't stay home alone without checking every window in the house. Looking back, I don't think people realize how terrifying it is to hear someone break into your home when you're just a kid. It was late fall during my 7th grade year. Our school had dismissed early for a teacher workday, so by a little after noon I was already home. My parents both worked full-time, so being alone for a few hours wasn't unusual. I had a routine. I'd toss my backpack on the kitchen chair, make myself something to eat, and spend the afternoon playing games on my computer until my parents got home around 5. Our neighborhood was usually quiet. The same people had lived there for years. Kids rode bikes after school. Neighbors waved when they mowed their lawns. Nothing exciting ever happened. Our house sat on the corner of a short residential street. The back door faced a narrow patio, surrounded by a 6-foot wooden fence with a small gate that led to the alley behind the houses. Nobody ever came to that door unless they knew us. Friends used the front door. Package deliveries were left on the porch. Even my dad always came through the garage. So when I heard 3 loud bangs against the back door, every hair on my arm stood up. Not a normal knock. Almost desperate. I looked at the clock on my computer. 1:47 p.m. My first thought was that maybe my dad had forgotten something, but I immediately dismissed it. He never knocked like that. Never. Then came another series of pounding knocks. Harder this time. Louder. The entire back door shook with each hit. I slowly stood from my chair without making a sound. My bedroom was at the end of the hallway, and from the doorway I could see straight into part of the kitchen where the back door was. I took one careful step into the hallway, then another. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. I leaned just far enough to peek around the corner. Nobody. The back door was still. The knocking had stopped completely. The patio outside looked empty. For a second, I actually wondered if I'd imagined how loud it had been. I stayed there another 10 seconds. Nothing moved, no voices, no footsteps. Just silence. Trying to convince myself it was probably some neighborhood kid playing a prank, I quietly backed into my room. I reached for my bedroom door, closed it. Click. The latch hadn't even fully caught when the sound came. A deafening crash exploded from the kitchen. Glass shattered across the floor. The sound echoed through the entire house. I didn't need to look. I knew someone had just come inside. Every muscle in my body locked up. For a split second, I couldn't even breathe. Then instinct took over. I slammed my computer shut before the screen could light up the room. The room went completely dark. Without thinking, I dropped to the floor and crawled underneath my bed. It wasn't one of those tall beds you see in movies. There was barely enough space for me to squeeze underneath. The wooden frame pressed against my back while my chest rested on the carpet. Dust clung to my shirt. I covered my mouth with one hand so I wouldn't breathe too loudly. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow, walking across broken glass. Someone was inside my house, and they weren't trying to be quiet. The footsteps moved slowly across the kitchen. Like whoever had broken in wasn't worried about anyone hearing them. I lay perfectly still beneath my bed, staring at the wooden slats above me. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Then came another sound. A cabinet door opening, followed by another. I reached into my pocket with shaking hands and pulled out my cell phone. It was one of those older phones with a tiny screen and physical buttons. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I was terrified that pressing a button would make a sound. After what felt like forever, I dialed 911. The phone rang once. Then a calm voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? I lowered my voice until it was almost a whisper. Someone broke into my house. The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it to her as quietly as I could. Are you safe right now? I'm hiding under my bed. There was a brief pause. Can you tell where the person is? They're still inside, I whispered. I can hear them. She told me to stay where I was. Don't make noise. Don't try to leave. Officers were being sent. I clutched the phone so tightly my hands started to cramp. The footsteps came down the hallway. They stopped. Right outside my bedroom door. I couldn't breathe. The doorknob turned. Slowly. The bedroom door creaked open. Sunlight from the hallway stretched across the carpet. From underneath the bed, all I could see were a pair of worn work boots. They stood in the doorway for several seconds. The boots finally moved. They walked farther into my room, closer. Every step made the floor creak. I squeezed my eyes shut. I honestly thought I was about to be found. Instead, the footsteps stopped near my desk. I heard drawers opening. Books falling onto the floor, the chair scraping across the room. Whoever it was wasn't looking for electronics. They weren't taking my computer. They were searching fast. After a minute or two, the footsteps left my bedroom. I waited. Then I heard them enter my parents' room. Closet doors slammed. Hangers crashed to the floor. Furniture scraped against the wall. It sounded like someone had turned the entire house upside down. Time moved painfully slowly. 5 minutes felt like 20. Every sound made my stomach tighten. Eventually, the noises became quieter. The footsteps returned to the kitchen. There was a long pause. Then I heard the back door open. Silence. Complete silence. I stayed under the bed. Several more minutes passed before I finally heard the unmistakable sound of police radios outside. Then someone knocked on the front door and loudly announced, "Police department!" Only then did I crawl out from underneath the bed. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. Broken glass covered the kitchen floor. Cabinet doors hung open. Every drawer had been dumped onto the floor. Family photos had been knocked off shelves. My parents' bedroom was even worse. Closets emptied, boxes torn apart. The officers walked carefully through every room, making sure no one was still inside. By the time my parents got home, the entire street was filled with police cars. I'd never seen my dad look scared before. The second he saw me standing outside with an officer, he wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. My mom wasn't far behind. She kept asking the same question over and over. "Are you okay?" I nodded. I didn't know what else to say. I was still trying to process what had happened. One of the detectives asked us to walk through the house and point out anything that looked out of place. That turned out to be almost impossible. Every room had been torn apart. As the officers continued searching, another detective spoke with one of our neighbors. A few minutes later, he came back looking thoughtful. He asked my dad a question. "How long have you lived here?" "About 5 months," my dad answered. The detective nodded. According to the information they'd gathered, the former tenant had also been involved in illegal activities. Word had spread around the neighborhood years earlier. Apparently, not everyone knew they had moved away. The officers believed the man who broke into our house had convinced himself there was still illegal possession and money hidden somewhere inside. Everything suddenly made sense. The way the house had been searched, the overturned furniture, the empty drawers. He hadn't been stealing electronics. He was hunting for money that had probably never been there in the first place. Before leaving, one officer asked if anything was actually missing. My dad and I walked through the house again. The television was still there. My computer hadn't been touched. My mom's jewelry box was untouched. For a while, we couldn't find anything missing. Then I remembered something. The night before, I'd placed a few dollars on the kitchen counter. It was my lunch money for school the next day. I walked over to the counter. The money was gone. That was it. Out of everything in the house, the only thing the burglar had actually taken was a few dollars in lunch money. The detective shook his head. "I don't think he found what he came for." A few days later, investigators arrested a man who lived nearby after gathering evidence and speaking with several witnesses. We later learned he had convinced himself our house still belonged to the people who had lived there before us. He had broken in expecting to find hidden cash. The family connected to the suspect moved away not long afterward, and the street became quiet again. Life eventually settled back into its old routine, but I didn't. For months, I couldn't stay home alone. My name is Mia, and this happened during my final year of university in 2017. Back then, I shared a rundown student house with 3 other students in a busy city. The place wasn't exactly secure. The front door was old, the locks were worn, and the house creaked whenever anyone walked around. My bedroom was the only one on the second floor. Across the hallway was the another room, but it was empty. The other 2 bedrooms were downstairs. My bed sat in the middle of my room, with the foot of the bed facing the bedroom door. If anyone walked into my room, they would be standing only a few feet away from where I was sleeping. It was early May, and we'd just finished our final exams. Between that, my 22nd birthday, and everyone leaving for the summer, we decided to have one last big night out. The house filled with friends before we left, music was playing, everyone was laughing, and by the time we made it into town, we were all pretty drunk. Around 2:30 in the morning, my boyfriend and I decided we'd had enough. As other girls were not ready to come back, we caught a ride home, eventually stumbled right into bed. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember being woken up. It was around 4 in the morning when my bedroom door flew open. My housemates had came back and stood in front of my bed, completely pale. She sounded terrified. "We've been robbed." At first, I honestly thought she was joking. Couldn't keep my eye open. I rubbed my eyes, looked at my boyfriend. "What are you talking about?" She just stared at us. Then she said, "Come downstairs." The first floor looked like someone had torn through it looking for buried treasure. Drawers had been emptied onto the floor. Closet doors were hanging open. Suitcases had been ripped apart. Anything valuable that wasn't being carried that night had disappeared. I ran upstairs. Everything looked normal, until I looked at the foot of the bed. My handbag was gone. My boyfriend's phone, gone. His wallet, gone. They had been sitting less than 3 feet from where our heads rested while we slept. I slowly looked at my bedside table. My laptop was still sitting there, untouched. That's when I realized what had happened. Someone had forced open the front door, walked into our house, searched every room, opened my bedroom door, walked to the foot of my bed, stood there, close enough to hear us breathing, picked up our belongings, then quietly walked back out. Neither of us woke up. Not once. The police found signs that the front door had been forced open, but there wasn't much else they could do. No useful fingerprints. No security cameras. No witnesses. The case eventually went cold. People always ask what scares me most about that night. It's not that someone broke into our house. It's knowing they stood beside my bed while I was drunk asleep. Sometimes I lie awake, wondering how long they watched us before reaching for the bag. Whether they paused, listening to make sure we were still asleep, or whether they smiled when they realized we never moved. I don't know who they were, but every night before I go to sleep, I still glance at my bedroom door.
Before you go, if you enjoyed this story, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and supporting the channel. Every bit of support means more than you know, and it helps me continue bringing you even more creepy, mysterious, and unsettling stories.